Hey, I'm Pat. Welcome to Daily Devo. Today we're going to talk about the source of the problem. Once upon a time, there was a town named Downstream, which sat on the banks of a raging river. For years and years, the town thrived and flourished. All was well in this little town called Downstream until the first body appeared in the river. The person was still alive, but they were struggling to keep from drowning. And in that moment, the people of this little town called Downstream jumped into action and they saved the struggling swimmer. There was a huge celebration in Downstream until the next day, when another body appeared in the river. But once again, the town of Downstream found a solution and saved this second person. As the days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, more and more bodies appeared in the river. It went from 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 20, scores of people needing to be saved. So the town of Downstream built boats and formed rescue teams and even developed schools to train rescuers. They eventually built a hospital to care for the victims. Downstream poured massive amounts of resources into assuring that all the people washing down the river would not be lost. One day, a wise and brave soul ventured to ask, "What's going on upstream of Downstream that's bringing all these bodies down the river?" There's a big difference between the cause of a problem and the symptom of a problem. Too often, you and I, whether it be in our personal lives or in the organizations we work in, spend way too much time and effort and resources fighting symptoms instead of going to the source of the problem. And what I love about James is that in chapter 1 of this book, he goes right to the source of one of our biggest problems in life. Look at James chapter 1, verse 13. James writes, "And remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, 'God is tempting me.' God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone." Now, there's something interesting about this phrase, "God is never tempted to do wrong." Remember, this was written 2,000 years ago in another language, in Greek, and the Greek word used here is not used anywhere else in the New Testament. It has the meaning experience. So James' logic is this. He's saying because God is not experienced in evil, because he has no capacity for evil, he has no vulnerability to evil, then he clearly will not be the one tempting us with evil. Now, it's true that God gave us legitimate desires like hunger and sex, but when those legitimate desires move towards sin, they're no longer from God. That's what James is saying. You see, hunger is from God, but when it moves to gluttony, it's a desire that is no longer from God. Sex is a desire from God, but when we seek to fulfill that desire outside of God's standards, then it's no longer from God. Well, why is this important? Why is it critical that you and I recognize that God never tempts? 2 reasons. Number 1, because to overcome the temptations that we all face, we need to know the source of those temptations. The next verses will actually tell us the source. Listen the next few days as we talk about this. But in this verse, James assures us that the source of temptation is never, ever, ever God. This truth is vital because it takes away some of the blame shifting that we all are apt to do. When it comes to sin, "God made me do it," or "God brought this on me," won't work. It's not true. Why is it critical that you and I recognize that God never tempts? Well, second reason, when it comes to fighting temptation and sin, there is great danger in associating evil to the one who is actually the source of our victory. What hope would you and I have if the actual source of our confidence, strength, and power in overcoming sin is actually tainted himself? You see, the truth is that all of us live in this little town called Downstream, and we will have temptations floating our way. But there's great danger if we don't look upstream to the source, both the source of the temptation and the source to our victory. In this little verse, buried in this great book called James, he assures us that the source of our temptation is never ever God, which is important because the source of our victory is in fact God. Today, not if, but when you are tempted, this is a guarantee that if you look upstream, you will find that the temptation did not come from God, but your victory will come from God.